Thank you. You know, in closing, I'm reminded that John led a pilgrimage of bipartisan members of Congress year after year after year to Selma, Alabama, to cross that bridge, as he would say, one more time. And over the course of those years, we've seen Republican leadership there. We've seen Democratic leadership there. We've seen members there. And I just want to implore, if you really want to do something to honor John Lewis's legacy, there is no greater thing than you can do than to restore the full protections of a bill that was a seminal piece of legislation that came out of the 60s. Under a seminal concept, every American should have the equal right, the equal access to the ballot box. And that is exactly what restoring the Voting Rights Act will do. Now, Supreme Court told Congress we had to have a new modern day formula. Well, we've done that. And there are still states that have substantial histories of voter discrimination. We still need federal oversight when states go amok. And in conclusion, I just want to remind everybody of what John said the last time he was on that bridge, riddled with cancer. But he stood tall and he said, never give up, never give in, keep your eyes on the prize. We in the Democratic caucus will keep our eyes on the prize. And yes, I've introduced it for the 5th time, but God willing and my constituents voting for me will continue to introduce it until it passes. The time is ripe to always do what's right, and it's right for us to pass the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. With that, I'll open it up for questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Congresswoman. There have been several ballot initiatives for this upcoming election in Ohio, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, all across the country to restore some of these protections that you've spoken about at the state level. Do you think that that's a worthwhile pursuit as you all work to restore federal protections?
Absolutely. Without federal oversight, all we have are state legislatures and state electorates to actually impose voter laws. And so I think that those ballot initiatives are a great way to amplify the need to restore federal oversight, to restore the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act. And so I personally think that those ballot initiatives are really critically important, because what you're having is ordinary Americans rising up and demanding the right to vote, demanding that there not be restrictive voting. You know, it's really interesting. My interns asked me, well, it's not really hard to vote, is it? And the reality is that when states choose what kinds of IDs are valid and can be shown in order to get a ballot, they're picking winners and losers. When the state of Alabama eliminated being able to show your power bill to prove where you live and who you were, when the states across this nation eliminated a validly issued federal ID called a Social Security card, which, oh, by the way, was one of the things that you could show in Alabama, and instead impose hunting licenses, you're picking winners and losers. When you know that there are folks who need assistance, the elderly, the disabled, to fill out their absentee ballots, and you make that a crime, you're making it harder to vote. So I support all initiatives to fight for equal access to the ballot box. Yes, ma'am.
Councilman, members, what is it about now that you think it stands in more of a chance? It's the 5th time. And talking about anniversaries, which are Freedom Summer,
Yeah.
the Civil Rights Act, 60 years. Will those in any way play a role in these getting more attention and more action and more motivation to get anything passed this year?
Well, I'm going to let the second part Mr. Clyburn answer, but as to the first, we've passed the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act twice out of the House. Unfortunately, it was because of Democratic votes, and it was when we had the House. But as Mr. Clyburn so eloquently said, it went over to the Senate, and we know that the Senate requires 60 votes in order to put a bill on the floor. I venture to guess that if we had 60 votes over in the Senate today, that to put the bill on the floor, that we would have 51 votes to pass it. That archaic rule, I know I've heard him speak so eloquently about it, but you're right that we're on an anniversary of Freedom Summers, and Mr. Clyburn, would you answer what kind of role does activism, grassroots activism, play in getting this across the finish line?
Well, thank you very much. Activism is what it's all about. The fact of the matter, this is going to be this is the 60th year of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and as Terry mentioned earlier, we will be going to Selma. It's our plan to go to Selma next March, and it will be the 60th anniversary that we'll be celebrating in 1965, the Voting Rights Act. You may recall, at least from your studies, I'm probably the only one up here old enough to remember, that when Congress passed in 1964, Civil Rights Act, President Johnson made it clear that that was it for a while, that nothing else could be done for a while. But that act was stripped of voting, it was stripped of housing. A lot of things that we thought were necessary got stripped out of 1964. In fact, the 64 Civil Rights Act didn't even apply to the public sector. It only applied to the private sector, the employment discrimination part of it. We didn't think that was good enough. I was there with John Lewis and others, and we activated folks all across the country. And the next year, August 6, 1965, we got the Voting Rights Act. Not because Congress wanted to do it, not because the president called for it, but because the activists made them do it.
Well, thank you. I know they've called votes, but thank you all. And stay tuned for some more good trouble that the Democratic caucus will get into as we pursue passing the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act.